Florida's central region rests upon a foundation of ancient limestone. This entire peninsula functions as one continuous permeable rock formation, aged between 20 and 30 million years old, which slowly erodes whenever rainfall percolates through its structure. This geological reality explains why the terrain here collapses not sporadically but continuously. Across the state, hundreds of new sinkholes emerge annually, consuming residential properties, parking facilities, highways, and complete crossroads. Some openings measure only a few feet across, while others engulf entire structures. Yet every single one descends toward the identical terminus, down into the Suwannee limestone formation, entering a submerged network of caverns and passageways that extends beneath the entirety of Florida's northern and central territories. For many years, underwater explorers have been systematically documenting this subterranean system. Within the Leon Sinks Preserve near Tallahassee alone, researchers have charted over 30 miles of submerged corridors. Scientists indicate that this documented portion constitutes merely a small segment of the total system. Each sinkhole functions as an entry point to this identical underground domain. During the early 1980s, a diver named Buddy Page, who had previously served as a United States Navy SEAL, was exploring a submerged collapse feature on the Aucilla River, situated roughly 45 minutes east of Tallahassee. This depression rested within the riverbed at a location where the watercourse disappears beneath the surface, a segment locally referred to as the half-mile rise. The water exhibited a dark coloration, reminiscent of brewed coffee, darkened by the presence of cypress trees lining the banks. Alligators cruised across the surface waters. Page descended approximately 30 feet to the river bottom, where he encountered a stratum of dark sediment that appeared completely untouched by previous disturbances. What he uncovered within that sedimentary layer prompted him to return to the surface and immediately reach out to archaeological researchers. He had found mastodon skeletal remains displaying cut marks consistent with human-made implements, bone tools, fragments from stone tool manufacturing, and deliberate markings carved into the limestone walls. These represented intentional alterations to the bedrock at a depth which, approximately 14,000 years ago, when ocean levels stood considerably lower, would have existed as dry terrain. Carbon dating analysis of the sedimentary stratum established human presence at this location at roughly 14,550 years before the current era. This predates the Clovis people, whom conventional chronology identifies as North America's original inhabitants, by approximately 1,500 years. The research findings underwent publication and peer review, yet subsequently faced effective suppression. For approximately 20 years, the scientific community treated these discoveries as simply too old to warrant serious consideration. This investigation examines what rests at the bottom of Florida's sinkholes, explains why this identical limestone formation continues producing evidence of a civilization that undermines every established timeline, and explores why a former Navy SEAL's revelation languished in obscurity for 2 decades before anyone dared to revisit the location. The Aucilla River differs significantly from other Florida waterways. It functions as a karstic stream flowing through limestone that has undergone continuous dissolution for millions of years. The river emerges, travels across the surface for some distance, then disappears underground into the bedrock, coursing through cave systems before re-emerging downstream. The riverbed consists of an irregular limestone floor marked by numerous depressions, each functioning as a natural preservation vessel. Sediment accumulates within these hollows, covering whatever existed on the surface and encasing it in strata that remain undisturbed because the current above moves at a sluggish pace. Most rivers constantly disturb their beds through turbulent flow. The Aucilla, however, preserves them. Diver Don Serbicek had been investigating the Aucilla since 1968, recovering stone implements and projectile points from the riverbed sediments. In the March 1983 edition of the Florida Anthropologist, Serbicek published his discoveries and strongly encouraged professional archaeologists to conduct their own investigations. State archaeologist James Dunbar and paleontologist S. David Webb from the Florida Museum of Natural History responded to this appeal. They arrived at the half-mile rise section of the Aucilla in 1983, where Buddy Page greeted them. Page had been diving this particular area for numerous years and possessed intimate knowledge of the bone deposit's exact location. He directed Dunbar and Webb to a specific depression within the riverbed, a sinkhole situated directly within the river itself, and instructed them to begin excavation there. The team excavated a test pit measuring 20 inches in depth. Within this excavation, they uncovered mastodon skeletal remains, bone tools, and lithic debitage, the small fragments produced when someone strikes flakes from a larger stone core during tool manufacturing. Radiocarbon analysis of organic materials recovered from this pit produced dates ranging between 13,000 and 11,700 years before the current era. This finding alone was extraordinary. Even deeper strata, which they had not yet accessed, would subsequently prove substantially older. The Ladson family, who owned the surrounding acreage, granted access permission and authorized camping on the property. The site received the designation Page Ladson, honoring both the diver who discovered it and the family who facilitated access. The excavation initiative that followed would extend across 15 years, absorb the professional lives of multiple researchers, generate findings that fundamentally challenged American archaeology's foundational assumptions, and subsequently fade from scholarly memory. Between 1983 and 1997, Dunbar and Webb directed underwater excavations at Page Ladson that represented unprecedented undertakings in American archaeology. Every task required completion while submerged. Divers descended carrying trowels and suction apparatus, systematically removing sediment strata by strata. These hoses transported material upward to the surface for screening and analysis. Underwater visibility measured only inches. The water remained stained dark brown by tannins released from decaying vegetation. Divers performed their work through tactile sensation in nearly complete darkness. Despite these exceptionally challenging conditions, the results proved remarkable. The research team recovered 8 stone artifacts from sedimentary layers deeper than any previously excavated in the southeastern United States. Among these findings was a bifacial chert knife featuring sharpened edges on both sides, unmistakably manufactured by human hands. No natural geological process produces a symmetrical bifacial edge. Adjacent to the knife, they discovered a mastodon tusk displaying parallel grooves, evidence of a stone tool used to scrape or carve the ivory surface. The tusk showed no signs of animal gnawing or natural fracture patterns. The grooves appeared deliberate, evenly spaced, and consistent with human butchering techniques documented at other Pleistocene-era archaeological sites. Radiocarbon measurements obtained from the deepest sedimentary strata produced dates exceeding 14,000 years before present. Dunbar and Webb published their conclusions. The archaeological community's response consisted initially of silence, followed by skepticism, and ultimately complete dismissal. The dates appeared too ancient. They directly contradicted the Clovis First paradigm, which maintained that human populations entered North America approximately 13,000 years ago via a land bridge from Asia and subsequently expanded southward. Any evidence predating Clovis was theoretically impossible. Additionally, the fact that the evidence originated from an underwater site excavated by divers in murky conditions using suction equipment provided mainstream archaeologists with justification to reject the findings outright. Underwater archaeology failed to achieve scholarly respectability during this period. The methodology was deemed insufficiently controlled. The findings, regardless of their extraordinary nature, were disregarded, and Webb's 15-year excavation project concluded in 1997. Nobody returned to Page Ladson for another 15 years. Between 1997 and 2012, the site remained undisturbed beneath the dark waters of the Aucilla River. No institution financed a return expedition. No university archaeology department dispatched a research team. The site that had produced the oldest evidence of human occupation in the southeastern United States was effectively treated as non-existent. This outcome was no accident. The Clovis First model represented more than merely a theory within American archaeology. It functioned as established doctrine. The narrative was straightforward. Human beings migrated from Asia to Alaska across a land bridge during the final ice age, traveled south through an ice-free corridor, arrived approximately 13,000 years ago, crafted distinctive fluted spear points, and hunted mammoths. They represented the first inhabitants. Every textbook repeated this account. Every tenure decision rested upon this assumption. Earlier pre-Clovis claims had emerged from sites in Chile, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Oregon, each encountering identical resistance. The dating was questioned. The stratigraphy faced challenges. The artifacts were reinterpreted as natural geological formations rather than human creations. The researchers responsible for these discoveries experienced professional marginalization. Dennis Stanford of the Smithsonian Institution characterized Page Ladson as one of the most thoroughly dated and oldest pre-Clovis sites yet discovered in North America. Even Stanford's authoritative endorsement proved insufficient. The gatekeepers of Clovis orthodoxy controlled academic journals, funding distribution committees, and conference presentation panels. Without their approval, a site could be technically published yet remain effectively invisible within the scholarly discourse. Page-Ladson transformed into a spectral presence in academic literature, referenced occasionally by sympathetic researchers while ignored by the broader archaeological community. The mastodon tusk bearing human cut marks remained in storage. The bifacial knife sat untouched in a drawer. The sedimentary strata that had produced dates of 14,550 years before present rested 30 feet beneath the surface in a Florida river. The discipline that should have been investigating these materials instead pretended they did not exist. Then, in 2012, someone finally returned. Jessica Halligan served as assistant professor of anthropology at Florida State University. She possessed training in underwater archaeology, one of only a few researchers nationwide with such specialized expertise. Michael Waters, director of the Center for the Study of the First Americans at Texas A&M University, had devoted years to constructing evidence supporting pre-Clovis occupation of North America. Together with Daniel Fisher from the University of Michigan and veteran Florida archaeologist Jim Dunbar, who had participated in the original excavation, they returned to Page-Ladson in 2012. Across 3 field seasons spanning 2012 through 2014, the team conducted dives at the site utilizing improved methodologies. They excavated using trowels, individually radiocarbon-dated twigs, seeds, and plant fragments recovered from each stratum, screened every piece of material, and documented every action on video. They understood that the establishment would scrutinize any methodological weakness, so they eliminated every possible vulnerability. Their findings confirmed and expanded upon everything Dunbar and Webb had discovered 20 years earlier. 6 stone artifacts were recovered from sedimentary strata dated to 14,550 years before present. The bifacial knife left no room for ambiguity. Halligan informed National Geographic that there was absolutely no possibility the knife had not been manufactured by human beings. The mastodon remains underwent examination by Fisher, an acknowledged expert on mammoth and mastodon specimens, who confirmed that the tusk grooves resulted from human tool use. Additional bones from juvenile mastodon, prehistoric bison, and camelid species were discovered within the same strata. A jawbone and teeth from a canid were also recovered, potentially indicating that these pre-Clovis populations travelled alongside domesticated dogs, though further investigation would be required for confirmation. The study appeared in Science Advances during May 2016. Waters informed the press that if the archaeological establishment refused to accept this site's validity, they would reject any evidence whatsoever. The paper underwent peer review, featured meticulous documentation, and rested upon 30 years of cumulative evidence from the same location. The archaeological establishment possessed no remaining methodological objections. Page-Ladson represents not an isolated anomaly, but rather the most thoroughly documented window into a submerged archaeological landscape extending across the entirety of Florida during the final ice age. When ocean levels stood approximately 300 feet lower than current measurements, the Florida peninsula extended to twice its present width. The coastline reached far into what now constitutes the Gulf of Mexico. Rivers that currently disappear underground once flowed across the surface. Sinkholes that are presently flooded existed as dry caves, water sources, and sheltering overhangs. The limestone karst forming Florida's bedrock created a terrain of natural wells and underground shelters ideally suited for early human habitation. As ice melted and sea levels rose over thousands of years, this landscape gradually became submerged. The evidence of whoever inhabited this region went underwater along with it. This explains why Halligan and Waters argue that the southeastern United States has been fundamentally misunderstood by archaeologists. The earliest archaeological record of the region does not exist on the surface. It rests submerged, buried within flooded sinkholes, sealed inside underwater caves. The technology required to access this record barely exists. Halligan ranks among the few archaeologists trained for underwater excavation. Most academic departments do not offer relevant coursework. Research funding remains scarce. The Aucilla River alone contains dozens of sinkholes that have never undergone formal investigation. Waters told National Geographic that Page-Ladson was discovered by accident, and locating additional sites like it would demand a coordinated effort that the discipline has not yet undertaken. Shipwrecks prove relatively easy to locate, he observed. Finding these submerged prehistoric sites, however, presents significant difficulty. The implications are staggering. A single sinkhole on one northern Florida river produced evidence of habitation at 14,550 years before present. What exists within the hundreds of unexplored sinkholes scattered across the state? What rests in the sediment at the bottom of Devil's Den, or within the caves beneath Aucilla Springs, or throughout the channels connecting every collapsed depression in central Florida to the same limestone labyrinth? The answer almost certainly consists of more evidence, older evidence, that nobody has financed efforts to discover. Page-Ladson forms part of a broader pattern that has quietly rewritten the timeline of human presence in the Americas, while textbooks have barely registered these changes. Paisley Caves in Oregon yielded human DNA dated to over 14,300 years ago. Meadowcroft Rock Shelter in Pennsylvania produced artifacts dated to at least 16,000 years before present, with researcher James Adovasio spending decades defending those dates. Monteverde in Chile produced dates of 14,500 years before present and was rejected so aggressively that excavator Tom Dillahay nearly abandoned the field entirely. Every site followed the identical trajectory: evidence discovery, publication, resistance, silence, and eventual grudging acceptance. But only after researchers had paid a professional price for being correct too early. Page-Ladson fits this pattern precisely. Dunbar and Webb's original excavation produced solid dates during the 1990s. Those dates were ignored for 20 years. Halligan and Waters returned, confirmed the dates using improved methodology, published in one of science's most prestigious journals, and the Clovis First model continued appearing in textbooks as though nothing had changed. The question is no longer whether humans occupied North America before Clovis. That question has been answered conclusively at multiple sites across 2 continents. The question now concerns why the answer has taken so long to reach the public and what additional evidence remains overlooked, while the discipline controlling the narrative refuses to investigate underwater environments. The Aucilla River continues flowing through the limestone karst of northern Florida, disappearing and re-emerging along its gradual path toward the Gulf of Mexico. The Page-Ladson sinkhole still rests 30 feet beneath the water at the confluence of the Wassissa and Aucilla rivers. Deeper sedimentary strata, those dated to 14,550 years before present, have been sampled but not fully excavated. There are layers below those Halligan's team reached that have never been tested at all. Nobody knows how deeply the human record extends at Page-Ladson. Buddy Page lacks the funding to determine this. Across the state, every sinkhole opening in a Florida backyard, every spring